Hi, my name is Cliff Hastings and welcome to my basement and this presentation on Mathematica Online. Today I will give you a 10-minute overview of how to use Mathematica Online, and then my co-author of the Hands-On Start to Mathematica book, Kelvin Mischo, will give you another 10 to 15-minute overview of some of the additional neat things and subtleties of Mathematica Online for you to use either in a classroom or in a work environment or at home. So let me go ahead and share my screen and get started for you. So again, this is Kelvin and I. So we are two of the three co-authors along with Michael Morrison of this book, The Hands-On Start to Mathematica, just to give you a sense that, we have some experience in this. So let's go to wolframcloud.com, and what I'm going to do is then open a new notebook so I can provide you this overview of how to use Mathematica online. So if you've used Mathematica before, you know it's a great text editor. This is the notebook environment. You can intermingle text and section headings and titles and calculations and graphics all in one notebook. If you know some of the keyboard shortcuts, for example, Alt-1 is a title cell, so I can start my notebook by saying a title of my presentation. If you don't know those keyboard shortcuts, no problem. In this little plus sign, you can click the type of cell you want to invoke. I'm going to choose other styles of text, click on section, and I'm just going to call this first calculations, and then put another cell. Let's call it let's make a text cell, and we'll just say, here is my first attempt. Now, with using Mathematica, that's some nice look at text and different things you can do textually, but obviously the heart of using Mathematica is doing calculations and graphics. So let's go ahead and do our first calculation. I'm going to use the solve function, so capital S on the function name, square brackets around what I want to calculate, and we'll say 3x plus 5, set equal to 0, solve for x. Run that calculation, and returns for me x is negative 5/3. Now you'll notice in Mathematica Online, it also provides this suggestions bar to say, hey Cliff, you can go ahead and do more calculations if you want, but let me suggest something for you. You might want to take this output and find the numerical values. I think that's a great idea. So it goes ahead and then inputs for me the Wolfram language that I need to then find the numerical approximation of that previous output of negative 5/3, and it gives me that result of negative 1.6667. I can't remember how many sixes I said, something like that, however. Let's define a new matrix. So we'll say this matrix is defined by, let's do a 3 by 3. So I'll say 3, 5, negative A, let's say B, 8/3 and 5. And then we'll say, how about negative 6, let's do 1 over C, and 3, something like that is fine. So when I have a list of data or lists of lists, curly braces around those things. Semicolon means suppress the output. I don't need to see that matrix listed out, but now I can do calculations like find the determinant of matrix 1, and we get that result. Or we can say find the inverse of matrix 1. So we get that as well. And of course we can find eigenvectors and all kinds of other things too. Now I do this inverse just to show you this is a pretty big result, pretty complicated. I'm not going to do that by hand anytime soon, but it does that very quickly and efficiently. And again, with the toolbar, provides you lots of different results or suggestions of what you want to do also. You'll notice to the left there's these in and out symbols, and those tags are useful because the numbers in those tags allow us to refer to outputs and use them in a future calculation. For example, out 28 was this result here. I can copy that, or I can just say, let's take out 28 or %sign 28, and I'm going to replace A with the number, let's say 7, and recalculate that. And so now we see the A, of course, disappears. 7's been inputted for the A, and then I've gotten this result. Let's do something different. Let's go ahead and move on to some graphics. So I'm going to hit Alt-4 again to make a section heading and call this first graphics. And let's do a calculation with the graphics. I'm going to use function name plot, open square bracket. I'm going to plot sine of x over x, where x goes from -10 to 10. So again, capital letter on function name, square brackets around what it is you want to calculate, curly braces around any lists, ranges, or domains. This is important to know to use Mathematica in the Wolfram language, but it's super simple. Once you get those very basics, then nothing really, maneuvers from that. You've learned 99% of how to use the Wolfram language in Mathematica from there. So really, really simple and really nice once you get those basics. Now again, the suggestions bar provides us some different options we can do next. So let's say we want to add a filling to this graphic. I can just click on add fill. It then provides me the Wolfram language solution on how to do that. It took my calculation and just added this option, filling automatic, to get this result. Now, the Wolfram language is obviously a very typical way of using Mathematica, and for any of us who learned how to use Mathematica, a long time ago, that is the only way. That's how we learned to program and to do calculations and graphics and that sort of thing. But somewhat new is the ability to use freeform input, which I don't need to use the Wolfram language, or I don't need to know capital letters and brackets and braces. And I invoke that by typing an equal sign. You'll see this orange equal sign here. And I'm just going to say to Mathematica, all right, just visualize for me, let's say sine x times y plus cosine of xy, where x goes from 0 to 3. Now again, I don't need to know any Wolfram language to do that. I'm just typing what I think. What happens is Mathematica sends my written language to its Wolfram servers. It parses my language, translates that to the Wolfram language, and then provides me that result. We can also work with data. Obviously, in most cases, I'm going to have a set of data either from a database or Excel or something. But in this case, I'm just going to type it in for you so you see how to work with data very quickly and easily. Back in my college chemistry days, I always remember how titrations looked, where I had a data point of how many seconds had passed, and then whatever that calculation was at the end of the seconds. So let me go ahead and type in something that looks like what a titration may provide in a chemistry environment. So again, I've typed in my set of ordered pairs. I'm going to type semicolon just to suppress the output. I don't need to see the data again. Hit enter to go down to make a multi-line input, and then say to Mathematica, list plot data 2. So I can visualize this data, and very nicely, and again quickly, it's provided me this set of dots. And then I can use the suggestions bar to do lots of other things as well. If I click more, it gives me all the different things it thinks I might want to do with this graphic as the next step. A few final things, just to again show you some basics of how to use Mathematica Online. The built-in data in the Mathematica is a very popular use of Mathematica. Again, Mathematica Online provides that as well. If I type equal sign population Germany and equal sign population of France, I'll find out what those two populations are, which you can use lots of different tools to do that. But the neat thing is that you can calculate with this stuff as well. So let's say I want to find the population of Germany plus the population of France and find the average of those two. So I'm actually calculating with that built-in data that I have found to find that average. Working with units is also very nice in Mathematica. If I use control equal, I get this nice little bubble that pops up, so I can type in things with unit conversions. So I'll say 300 feet plus, and you see it turns gray with a check mark when it says, yep, I know what you're talking about with this unit. I'll say 0.1 miles, and let's also add one more. We'll do, how about 0.5 kilometers. And then once I have my units all written out, I can hit Shift Enter to do that calculation. It tells me it's 2,468.42 feet. But what I'd really like to see is miles. So we see the first option in the toolbar is convert to something. It thinks it might want to convert to inches. Nah, I'm going to convert to this option of miles. And then I see that it's almost a half mile with this three things calculated. So that is a very, very quick look at using Mathematica Online. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, and then I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kelvin Mischo, who's going to provide you an overview of some more interesting things instead of just the basics of how to use Mathematica Online. All right, thanks.
Hi, my name is Kelvin Mischo. As Cliff mentioned, I'm co-author of the Hands-on Start to Wolfram Mathematica book. I'm going to talk about some of the advantages of having content and having notebooks in browser or on our cloud. And I'm going to specifically talk more about sharing projects and how to collaborate with other Mathematica or Mathematica Online users. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the cloud storage that's built into Mathematica Online. So this, as a person who is authoring content, this lets you access that content or create content across a lot of different devices. I've got a few screenshots here where I'm comparing and contrasting, but if you create content in Mathematica Online, which we just saw Cliff do, where he created a series of calculations, if you save that content and then log in your local installation of Mathematica, you can pull up that notebook and interact with that content, and it's all very interchangeable, which is nice. But what's even more useful is you can log into Mathematica Online from any web-enabled device. So even something like a Chromebook, where that device is less powerful than a full Windows or a full Mac machine, because the calculations are happening on our server, and because there's no plugin that's needed, you can log in from, as I said, anything that runs a browser, and you can pull up your notebook again, or start a new notebook, or append to your work. But the variety of available devices is much, much greater with Mathematica Online. We also have an app, so if you're using something like an iPad, we've got a Wolfram Cloud App. It's available on both iOS and Android, but the idea is that you pull up the app, and that helps with it helps provide a very convenient keyboard. It helps lay out the notebook very conveniently, but in general here, the notebook looks exactly the same, which is precisely what we want. And on an iPad, the app is still tunneling to our servers to do the calculation, and but the look of it, the look of the notebook and the authoring environment is exactly the same. Same is true with an iPhone. So even on that smaller screen, the text, the calculations, the titles are all very usable. If you've got an example with a slider, you can even move the slider with your finger, similar to how you would do that with a mouse on a full installation or with a mouse in Mathematica Online. So the availability across devices is very, very good with Mathematica Online because everything looks the same, and a notebook is a notebook on any of those devices. Next thing I want to talk about is publishing a notebook. So this gets more into sharing a finished project. I'm going to quickly show the workflow of this, where I'm back in Mathematica Online here. This is the same notebook. After you've got a project that's completed, you can click the Publish button up here. You can give your project a different name, or you can password protect it. But when you click this Publish button, Mathematica Online generates a different URL, a public-facing URL, which you can either copy or frame into an existing website, so you can embed the content. But when you view the page, this second URL, again, anyone can read this text, anyone can look at the calculations, and anyone can move the slider to do some mouse-driven calculations as well. No installation is needed, they just need to go to this URL. So let me drill in a little bit on how that works. You can publish a notebook either from a local installation of Mathematica or Mathematica Online. Then, as I said, the recipient, anyone can look at this, but the recipient can also do some mouse-driven calculations. When they do those mouse-driven calculations, they use the author's cloud credits, meaning the author has a pool of time on our servers that refreshes monthly. It's a pretty healthy pool of cloud credits per month, and it refreshes every month. But that's how the recipients, when they move those sliders, that's how it works, where the cloud credits of the author powers those calculations. And then in general, a published notebook can be included in really any web page. So if you have a personal project where you want more calculations, it's a good use for that. If you have an academic publication, you can include a published notebook and the link to that published notebook. So people reading your article, they can go off and look at more graphics or more supporting calculations very easily. Or this is really nice for course materials. So I'll talk about this in a minute, but this is a nice way to post course materials where everybody can look at it as a preview and then start to use it and interact with it. So that leads me to adapting a published notebook, where if you want to edit a published notebook in Mathematica or Mathematica Online, there's a really easy way to do that as well. So I'm going to click back here to this published notebook. The two ways to do this are the make your own copy and the download button. So as the recipient of this notebook, as the reader, if I click make your own copy, this prompts me to log into my copy of Mathematica Online, and it copies the notebook into my account. And then this is all now a live and editable notebook after it copies. So if I go in here and say 2 times x and reevaluate this, this is all now a live notebook again. So let me drill in and talk about how this works as well. So if the recipient of your notebook is a Mathematica Online user, they can click make your own copy. And again, then they've got a copy where they can adapt your notebook for their purposes, or they can append to it, or they can take notes in it. Download is the same idea, but it downloads a full notebook, and then they can just edit that in a full Mathematica, a local Mathematica installation. So colleagues, friends, or students, they all independently alter calculations. So as I mentioned, when they click make your own copy, that does not affect the author's copy of the notebook. It auto copies into the recipient's cloud storage, basically. So that's really useful for course materials and course assignments. So if you want to publish an assignment or materials, and you know, though, that the student is going to take that and make their own notes, or they're going to read your instructions and then author their own content, that's a really good way to set this up and post the published notebook in a learning management system or a course management system, which is really nice. Also, the recipient uses their own licensing, so that after they log in or after they run this in Mathematica, it no longer uses those cloud credits. It starts to use the recipient's resources and the recipient's licensing, which is nice as well. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is web forms. So this is another way to share a finished project, but it's a way to share a finished project where you don't necessarily want people to focus on the Wolfram language, you just want them to do computations. So let me click back here and look at this notebook. This is the published notebook. I'm going to go back to the original. And there are commands built into the language now. So if you're in Mathematica Online, you can run these commands where instead of publishing the notebook, really what you're doing is building a web form, and you're building all the HTML for that web form. So when I click on this, again, a different URL comes up. So I could send this to anyone in the world, and anyone could start to interact with this. But instead of moving a slider for the live calculation, what people can do here is actually type any equation into this input field. When they click submit, they run my same plot statement to compare these two plots. And then they can tinker with this and compare several different plots or interact with this in whatever way you like. But this is the live calculation that's built into web forms. Nice thing about web forms is the recipient could upload a data set, or they could type in text, or they could type in equations like what I was doing, or just numerical values, or more than one of any of these things. So the flexibility for what the user can upload and how they can interact with the calculation, that flexibility is greater than a published notebook. Mathematica Online users also use these cloud credits to power these web forms. So when the recipient is clicking submit and running those calculations, similar to a published notebook, that just deducts against the author's cloud credits. I think this is also great for personal websites. So if you want to have someone run a series of calculations but focus on some general topic you're explaining, this is a great use for web forms. Also a great use is course materials. And I've seen people do things like lab reports where students upload data and they want charts or statistics, and to have that laid out very specifically, that's a great use for web forms. You could also just do some supporting animations, or maybe some surveys where the web form collects some data and then that's integrated into our cloud storage, our data bins specifically. And then you can do live calculations based on that specific calculation, or in aggregate. You know, if a bunch of people submit information, you could do calculations based on what everyone has submitted over time. So web forms are pretty flexible and very useful. I don't think it's a choose web form or publish notebooks. I think they're both useful just for different workflows and different scenarios. So I'd like to end here just by talking about a few learning resources. As Cliff mentioned, he and I and another co-author, Michael Morrison, we are the co-authors of the Hands-on Start to Wolfram Mathematica book. We have recently put a lot of work into the third edition, and we're just releasing that now. That third edition has a updated and greatly expanded chapter on sharing and a lot of the things that I mentioned here today. I'm going to quickly show the PDF of this. So as you can see by the slider on the right here, this is a fairly detailed chapter. So we've gone through this somewhat quickly today. The chapter goes through it in a lot more detail. There's a lot more of a narrative structure of how you would share projects, but you know what all the options are and what all the options are specifically, you know, when you might want to do saving as a PDF versus publishing a notebook versus a web form. So all of this is outlined in a lot more detail in the chapter, as well as explaining some of the commands that I was using to do web forms, or some of the options to maybe have a password on this or whatever. But the third edition of the notebook has a lot more detail on this, in addition to the majority of the book being focused on the language itself, you know, Wolfram Language and Mathematica itself, and how to use it. But the sharing is useful regardless of how you use Mathematica or how you use Wolfram Language. While I'm here, I'll mention if you're teaching courses, we do have a free video for Mathematica Online. So you could send this video to students, they can watch it outside of class, and similar to what Cliff did today, where he started with a blank notebook and just talked through building up your first calculations, that is the focus of this video as well. So students can watch this and understand the basics of Mathematica Online and how to use this, and then they can be ready for projects that you assign to them in courses. In addition, Cliff and I also have a seminar series which runs at specific times Same idea where the calculations are built up live and students type along as Cliff talks and as Cliff builds up his notebook. But since it's scheduled, we have a live Q&A. So if people get stuck, usually I'm there or a few other people, and then they can chat with us and ask questions, or if they get stuck, that we can troubleshoot in real time with them. So if you are interested in more detail on any of this, I've listed out both of our email addresses, Cliff and myself, but I will end there. And thanks for attending today, and I hope this content was useful. So it seems like we've kept up with the questions in the chat pod so far, and we've run a little bit long. So for more Q&A and for more questions, we'll put Cliff's email in the chat pod and probably mine as well. And just drop us a line, email us. We can talk offline if you have more questions. But thanks again for attending.